Hey, Babe Ruth fans, this is Brent Stevens from BabeRuthCentral. Today I'm talking with Jerry Amernic, who is the author of Babe Ruth, The Superstar's Legacy. Thank you for your time, Jerry.
Hi, Brent. How are you?
Good, thanks. So let's start off by, can you just share a little bit about yourself and your background and how it kind of ultimately led to being an author?
Sure. Well, I'm an author from way back, former newspaper reporter at one time, and I used to do a lot of magazine work. I've been writing books since the 1980s, both fiction and nonfiction books. And with Babe Ruth, my first novel was published in 2004. It was called Gift of the Bambino, and it was about a boy and his grandfather and how they were bound by baseball and the spirit of Babe Ruth. So even though it was a work of fiction, I did a lot of research on Ruth to write it. And some years later, I met your dad, Tom Stevens, and ran this idea by him about doing a book about the legacy of Babe Ruth, which really hadn't been done before. And it's been germinating really, I guess, for quite a few years, and finally went out and wrote it, and it just came out, Babe Ruth, The Superstar's Legacy.
So you kind of just touched on this a little bit, but maybe in a little bit more detail. What really inspired you to write a book about Babe, at least on this set of topics?
Well, I live in Toronto, and when I discovered that Babe Ruth hit his first professional home run in an official league game in my home city in Toronto in 1914, I kind of got the Babe Ruth bug. It was the only minor league home run he hit. He was a pitcher with the Providence Grays, and it was the summer of 1914. Of course, he wound up joining the Red Sox in the majors, but he hit one minor league home run at this old ballpark in Toronto, and that's what really got me involved, and it was part of my novel, A Gift of the Bambino, and that started with that home run in 1914, so it's quite historical. And I've just been researching Babe Ruth ever since because I just found him a very intriguing character.
Can you share a little bit more about your book and what the premise is?
Yeah, well, as I say, there have been many books about Babe Ruth, as you know, and there have been many biographies, and your grandmother Julia did a book as well, and there have been kids' books and even, well, works of fiction. But no one has really written a book about the legacy of Babe Ruth, and that's what this is about. It looks at the legacy of Ruth on many different fronts, and it goes far beyond baseball and goes far beyond sport. So, I mean, there's yourself running your site, BabeRuthCentral, and your dad and your grandmother, Julia, of course. But I also get into things like the Babe Ruth League, which has over a million kids and youngsters playing organized baseball. The Babe Ruth Museum in Baltimore, which has been around for many, many years. I talk about the sports collectibles industry, which is a billion dollar business today, and Babe Ruth is easily the number one player in that. And we get into things like even last year, as recently as last year, there was an 11-month exhibit at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. at their National Portrait Gallery, and they did an exhibit on Babe Ruth. So these are all different aspects of the legacy of Ruth, and that's what my books get into. Chapter by chapter, we explore each of those, sort of like, the layers of the proverbial onion, and looking at all these different elements of why Babe Ruth endures, and he certainly does.
Great, thank you. So what has the response been so far to the book, and have you heard from fans and their impressions?
Yeah, well, we're getting really good response from all kinds of people. The book right now is available only on Amazon and at the website I created, which is BabeRuthLegacy.com. So we're getting good response. I'm planning to do a few things over the summer to kind of get out on the road and share it a little bit. We've actually got something set up now at the Hall of Fame in Cooperstown in July, where I'm going to be doing a presentation and a signing there, and so and also the Babe Ruth Museum in Baltimore, as I mentioned. So the early response is very good, and people that have seen the book, I think, readily recognize that this is a different kind of take on Babe Ruth, one that hasn't been done before.
Excellent. So it sounds like you dived into a lot of different aspects of the Babe from a legacy perspective.
Yes.
What's one of the more interesting things you learned during your research process for the book?
Well, I think it has to do with more of the humanitarian side of Babe, where I've talked to people where a lot of researchers, baseball historians, all the charities he supported, which starts, I guess, in the Florida area, St. Petersburg, where the Red Sox had their spring training, and later the Yankees. And he supported over 70 different charities there. And I think you can make the case that he was probably the first athlete philanthropist because he supported all kinds of things. And it was your grandmother Julia that first told me about this, about the fact that he would even pay for operations for children of families who couldn't afford the operation. And he did all kinds of things like that. And this really kind of hit home for me when I went to Cooperstown last summer. I went through the Babe Ruth scrapbooks in the library, and you see countless photographs of Babe with kids, orphanages, hospitals, kids that are disabled, and these kids come in all ethnic groups, all colors, all there's as diverse as you can imagine. And so I learned something else about Babe Ruth too, and also the fact that we get into the latter parts of the book about why he never became a manager. And talking to people that have researched this, it seems to be that Babe Ruth was playing with black players from the old Negro leagues on barnstorming tours as early as 1918, and baseball, of course, was segregated during his time, and he was no advocate of segregation. So I think you could make the case that he would have advocated hiring black ball players, and that was a no-no in those days. Your grandmother Julie also told me stories about he would have encouraged players to ask for more money from the owners. So, these could be a couple reasons why he never got to be a manager, though it's evident now that there were many teams that did express interest in hiring him, but it never came to be. And I think maybe these could be the reasons why.
Very interesting for sure. Be great if someday we were able to really validate what happened there. But stay tuned for that, I guess.
Yeah.
So what is what impression or key messages do you want to leave your readers with as they finish reading your book?
Well, I think there's a lot of material in the book that people probably didn't know about, and in fact, I do one chapter on the Babe Ruth jersey that sold at auction 6 years ago in 2012. It sold at auction for $4.4 million. This was a jersey he wore in the 1920-21 season with the Yankees, and that's a Guinness World Record for an item of sports memorabilia. So I mean, he was a superstar as a baseball player, as an athlete, but I think you can also make the argument that he was a superstar as a person. He was a humanitarian, and his iconic status just has endured through the years, which I think is quite amazing. So he's a figure who goes beyond baseball, who goes beyond sport. Mike Gibbons, the guy who ran the Babe Ruth Museum for so many years, said he's not a sports icon, he's a cultural icon, and I think it's true. I think what I like to use the term that it was a perfect storm that kind of created Babe Ruth. You had the dawn of the 1920s. He went to New York in 1920, so the dawn of the Roaring Twenties. You had New York City, and you had this personality that was the Babe, and all these things came together and created an icon. And as my book makes the case, it's an icon that has stood the test of time because he's still out there today.
I get the impression that you're a big baseball fan. What is it about the game that you really appreciate?
Well, I tell you, I'm a sports fan. I think, to be honest, I'm probably even a bigger Babe Ruth fan than a baseball fan. I follow the baseball as I follow other sports too, but it was really the character of Ruth that attracted me. He's just, I just think of fascinating guy, and it may be an LA sports writer who summed it up best, and was an article he wrote just 3-4 years ago that I came across, and he said something to the effect that Babe Ruth endures because there is enough truth between the lies. So not to say that there are lies, but there's a lot of things about Ruth we don't know. It's hard to separate fact or fiction. I guess the most a notable thing is the called shot home run from the 1932 World Series. Did he point to the fences or did he not? But there's a lot of things about Ruth that sound kind of mythological. But as this guy said, there's a lot of truth to things that he did, which is, I think, why he has endured. So I just think he was a humanitarian and beyond a great athlete. I think he loved the fans. You can make the case he loved the fans more than any other athlete, and the fans loved him back. So I think it's a relationship that is still going on, and it's amazing because it's 70 years after his death, and that love is still out there.
Yeah, well said. So, are there any final thoughts that you have that you'd like to share about the Babe based on your experience up to this point?
I think it's a matter of appreciating. I'll give you an example. Last week, the newspaper here, one of the big newspapers here in Toronto, the back page of the sports section, I just was opening the page. It was a Saturday paper, and there was a full-page ad, and there was a picture, a drawing. It was of Babe Ruth in his Yankees uniform pointing to the outfield fences. It was, the called shot home run, which I alluded to earlier. Though it didn't say anywhere Babe Ruth, but it was obviously him. And the ad was about prostate cancer, for God's sake. It's about pointing. And he's pointing his finger, and it had to do with prostate cancer. And I was it's comical when you're looking at it, but I'm thinking, and there's a full page ad, and I'm figuring it cost, I don't know, $40,000 to take out the ad in the paper. And there's Babe Ruth. Here he is in 2018. Organizations are using him for full page ads, and they don't even have to put his name there. So, as I say, he just endures on many different fronts, and I think that's unusual. But I think a lot of it has to do with the kind of person that he was.
Most certainly. Yeah. No, thank you for sharing that final story. You're right. He just continues to exist in today's conscious, which is very exciting.
Yeah.
Hey, if you've still got that ad, I'd love to see a picture of it.
Oh, yeah, I should scan it and send it to you. It's I still got it. Yeah.
Good.
I'll scan it. It's the full page, and I was kind of blown away when I saw it, and then I saw who's putting it out, so I thought that was pretty interesting. In fact, I did an interview just last week, and I mentioned that. It was with a well-known sports broadcaster, and he started laughing when I told him, but I said, well, yeah, but it was just the other day in the newspaper, so there you go. He doesn't fade. So on my website, BabeRuthLegacy.com, we're rolling out things every week, and we get into things like this that I just mentioned too. So, like I say, Babe Ruth, he doesn't disappear. I think his star is actually growing as time goes on, which I think is very unusual.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you again, Jerry. I really appreciate your time and sharing all of your stories and experiences in regards to the Babe. And I wish you the best of luck with your book. And again, that can be found at BabeRuthLegacy.com. Thanks again, Jerry.
Okay, thank you, Brent.